You're in the waterloop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast helping water leaders to discover solutions and drive change. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This is episode number 177, Living with Water in New Orleans.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.
I'm here in New Orleans by the Mississippi River. New Orleans is one of the most unique water cities. It has this incredible relationship with the Mississippi River. Since New Orleans was founded here because of the river, it's had to find ways to coexist with the river, to manage it, to thrive with it, to be resilient to it. A lot of that has involved big, hard infrastructure, pipes and pumps and levees and channels. Half of New Orleans is actually lower than sea level, and with all the rainfall and storms, that causes a lot of flooding. New Orleans is now discovering how to be living with water and adapting these techniques and projects on public land, on private property, in parks that actually absorb the water, let it be there, and be part of their solution for managing their relationship with water. I'm really excited to go around and meet some of the people that are leading this change and talk to them about these solutions. New Orleans has a lot in common with the Netherlands in terms of both of these places have areas that are below sea level. And so it's been a really special, unique challenge with how they manage water. So there's been a big exchange for, centuries between the Dutch and the people in New Orleans about how they do this. And for a long time, that was the big, heavy infrastructure, the pipes, the pumps, the levees, the seawalls, whatever it might be. And the Dutch have also realized that that can't be the only way to manage water. They have to take this living with water approach. And so New Orleans has started to adopt that as well. Gonna go talk to Rami Diaz at Waggonner Ball. They are a landscape architecture firm that is really folding this living with water approach into a lot of projects, not just here in New Orleans, but other places around the U.S. Charleston, Norfolk, Miami, even Wilmington. And Rami Diaz here is one of their landscape architects, and he's going to talk to us about how this is happening in New Orleans. Rami, how's it going? How are you doing?
Sorry.
Good. Tell me about the topography of New Orleans. I'm fascinated by this, place and the way it's so unique compared to really any other city in the U.S. and why it makes it challenging to manage water.
So it's a unique place in the world in that it's one of the few places where the river is actually higher than the land around it, right? So it's a deltaic plain where the river shifted course over time and built the landscape through floods. So every time the banks would flood, it would create a natural levee, and you had nicer soil by the river where it was heavier. That heavier soil would fall first, and then it would kind of fluff off into this very light kind of stuff. And then the marshes developed and the swamps developed along the banks of the river. Yeah. And so we have this very young landscape. I mean, the land that we're built on is only a couple thousand years old.
In geologic time.
Geologic time, it's nothing,
Yeah.
right? And so the structures of the city are actually very new in terms of geology. It's also very weak soil that subsides with oxidation. When you drain the soil and you expose it to air, it oxidizes and shrinks, and so that's part of the story as well. As the city developed and as we started to develop a drainage system in the turn of the last century, we were able to expand out into the marshes more and more. So we drained the swamp, we cut down all the trees, we built into these low-lying lands that are now, 7th Ward, Gentilly, Lakeview, most of Jefferson Parish on the East Bank.
And a lot of those areas are actually lower than sea level.
They're below sea level, right.
Yeah.
They didn't start out below sea level. They were at sea level, and then we drained the swamp, which then lowered it to the whatever the foundation was of that marsh or swamp, and then over time it subsided more. So there's some areas of the city that are just subsiding and subsiding and subsiding. And the more we drain and the more we remove the water, we sink more, right? So that's part of the kind of impetus for the urban water plan was, deal with the rain and deal with the flooding, but also we need to find ways to manage our subsurface because the city is falling apart because of the soil that we are built on.
Is there anything with the intensity of rainfall? Has that been changing? I know New Orleans is prone to these big rainfall events, but has that been picking up?
For sure. We're having more extreme events and also more drought. So it's kind of a flip, right? We're having shorter, more extreme storms. It used to be that we'd have big, long storms that would go for 24 hours or 18 hours, and now we're having these like 2-hour storms where we're getting the same amount of rain in 2 hours that we would have had in 12 hours.
So New Orleans has a history of kind of a relationship with the Netherlands, right? Another place that has a lot of areas below sea level, have had to do unique things to manage water. The living with water approach is now kind of being borrowed from the Dutch. Yeah. Could you talk about what is living with water? What is this approach?
So it's fundamentally about value and value from water. It's not just about managing it or mitigating it or fighting it. It's about living with it, right? Find ways to manage it that are more natural and that bring value, economic value. So if you think of it as, we have to make these big investments in infrastructure, they should also have a real estate benefit. We should want to live next to water, right? Some of the highest value real estate in New Orleans is along the Bayou St. John because people want to be by the water. And so you make it visible, you make it something people want to own and have pride in. It's a little different than a pipe underground that people don't know is there and don't understand
So these projects are, when there's big rain events or whatever it might be, the water can be there, it can be present, if you will, it can be visible, it's part of that landscape. But then when it's not raining, you still have this beautiful landscape.
You have a beautiful landscape, exactly. So, and that's another principle of the living with water approach is multifunctional, multi-benefit, right? So a dike in the Netherlands, for example, the Westerdijk in Rotterdam, first of all, you barely know it's there. It's higher ground. There's a road on top of it. There's streetcars on top of it. There's bike lanes. There's houses right up next to it. It's part of the landscape. It's seen as something valuable as part of the city. Their drainage canals in Rotterdam, you don't know they're drainage canals. It's just parkland with canals. And so that's sort of the vision that we have for how do we do future infrastructure in New Orleans or how do we renovate what we have so that we can make more space for water and more time for the water to be managed. So that's the other kind of part of the story. We talked about the intensity of the storms. It's also about time. So if your whole idea is I'm going to pump every inch of water that falls on the city and get it out as fast as I can, that's the historic approach. We're saying, well, we need to hold on to it, slow it down a little bit, find room so that the pumps have time to do that. Because we still need to drain, right? Most of the water still needs to be taken away. If the pumps in the drainage system, beyond the pumps, the system as well, like the pipes, the canals, the catch basins, they just get overloaded by these pulses of water. If we can slow down how quickly the water gets into the system has time to catch up.
So the gray and the green both have a role and work together. So in New Orleans, we're here at your offices and you've got these great examples of projects that are going on around New Orleans, living with water kind of projects. Could you just talk about what's happening here to kind of really lean into this and the scale of what might be underway?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, building off of the Dutch dialogues, which was right after Katrina, we developed the Urban Water Plan, Greater New Orleans Urban Water Plan, and within that there were many demonstration projects, right? We kind of said, here's an available piece of land, what would happen if you converted it into a stormwater park, or take these streets and make canals, Dutch-style canals, for lack of a better description. Those over time developed into projects that are funded. So the National Disaster Resilience Competition work is funding many projects in the Gentilly district. There's also been a hazard mitigation grant program dollars from FEMA going to projects where for every $1 of avoided damage, you can spend $1 on the project. And those projects are underway now. There's many of them around town. And so it's taken 10 years, but we're building stuff now, right? You have to have patience in this business.
Sure.
They're actually getting built now. So the one that's going to be the signature project for us, the big one that has a lot of heart behind it, is the Mirabou Water Garden, which is out in Gentilly. It was a site owned by the Sisters of St. Joseph. It was their convent, and it's 25 acres, a very big site, undeveloped. We're returning it back to sort of a bottomland hardwood forest for a lot of the site, and we're taking water from the neighborhood and putting it into the park instead of taking it 2 miles away to the pump station that's way over on the other side of this flat landscape. So we're managing it where it falls.
So Gretna City Park is where we are. Like, what is this project?
Gretna City Park is the first finished pilot project from the LA SAFE program. So it's the 6-parish resilience program here. This was the first to break ground and now the first to finish. The park didn't have any recreational infrastructure. The pond was serving sort of a stormwater function in the past. But this project is demonstrating what a public space can do in terms of flood mitigation for the neighborhood surrounding. This one in particular is where all the water ultimately ends up, and you can hear it right now. The rain last night and the pond's up. You can hear the drainage running out through this weir structure.
Okay.
So before the project, this was fenced off. There was no parking lot, no public access, and this was just a concrete engineered structure. And we built this whole pavilion on top to celebrate this experience of water.
Yeah.
Besides the playing field, everything else is just walk and enjoy nature.
Yep.
Besides locating public space at water features, we also wanted to make sure you could sort of see points of interest through the park. So that's why some of these features are located kind of within view corridors.
Yeah.
There was a tension between where to put water, potentially take out forests, and where to preserve. And what we found by analyzing a tree survey was that there were certain areas of forest that were ponding and degraded already. And so there was sort of a double benefit. Those were the areas where water storage happened. We cleared and have now replanted.
Oh, wow.
And then preserved some of the healthier forests, like on that side of the pond.
I would be thrilled if I was a resident of the area to just have this.
So we took those bearing points and branched out in the V structure to carry more roof.
Got it.
And that V shape became now a motif across the park. The
Carried
pavilion
that
here,
forward, yeah.
to the bridges,
The design.
just to feel a little more cohesive.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And in all of these areas around the pavilion, different types of native meadows and things. So it's not just going to be mowed grass.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of variety.
Gators. Can't have those here.
There's a sign the city's going to put back up, kind of a beware of alligators. It looks like a joke, but it's not. This whole area around here is part of the bog garden. The whole site was just ponding here and had no way out. So the land feature remediates that. This is where most of the new tree planting happened. We have a few hundred new trees on site.
Yeah.
And you'll see in the middle of the site, on the playing field, it's high.
So, you've got moisture. You've got this moisture will come here, pond here, but it'll come through and slowly make its way.
Slowly percolate out.
Yep.
But then a little bit of history about the local citizens who founded the park. And we have, every sign has English, Spanish, and Vietnamese.
Vietnamese. Is that a big population here in Gretna?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Huh.
And really all around New Orleans.
Oh, really?
Yep, on the Delta. It was a site, the whole New Orleans metro area was a site where Vietnamese immigrants came at the end of the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow.
And it's sort of a similar landscape to the Mekong River Delta. The whole park was this almost undiscovered gem. It was so informal. You felt like you were the first one to see it when you used to walk through.
Wow.
And I think there's still some of that spirit.
I love it. I look forward to coming back sometime when it's all green and grown in.
Please do.
Yeah.
Please do. I'm sure it'll be green in no time.
Really excited about this here. Classic Creole cuisine. Red beans and rice, jambalaya, crawfish etouffee. The gumbo shop here in the French Quarter. Had to stop for a classic. I'm here at City Hall in New Orleans. The city has a huge role in managing water, sewer, drinking water, and the flooding issues. They have been involved in the big infrastructure for a long time, the pipes, the pumps, and all of that. But they have also realized that a living with water approach is needed across the city and are starting to put momentum behind it. We're going to talk to Meagan Williams. She is an urban water resources planner with the Office of Sustainability and Resilience. She's really one of the people that's leading the change here in New Orleans and putting in these projects that are beautifying communities and helping to manage water. You too. How's it going?
Welcome back to the city.
I love it. I
Good
wish
to
I was
see
here
you.
for more than a day and a half this time.
This living with water concept, the green infrastructure concept. So with New Orleans, we sit at the bottom of a bowl and we're surrounded by levees. So we pump every drop of water that falls, we pump it out of the city and we pump it across the city. So we don't pump directly into the Mississippi River. We have to pump to the northmost side of the city, which is Lake Pontchartrain. That's a lot of water to pump. That's a long way to go. So for us, living with water, a lot of it is a combination of sort of this green and gray infrastructure thing where we do still have to consider piping and culverts and, drain lines and things like that. But at the same time, because we pump so much water out, we also want to hold as much water back from getting into the system immediately. So that's where the green infrastructure comes in for us is we can put detention ponds, we can put tanks, rain gardens, bioswales, permeable pavement, all these interventions that kind of mimic what nature does in its most natural habitat. We try to mimic that as much as possible so we can hold some water back before it gets into the pump station so we can give a little bit of a relief to our very aging infrastructure.
What's been the arc or the uptake of living with water on the city's part, right? On public property, these projects. It's been a process of kind of learning more about it, getting these things designed, getting them put in. Just what's that trajectory been like? How's the momentum and what's happening here in New Orleans?
I think from a municipality standpoint, we're all on board with it. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't think that that's the answer. We've seen it work. We've seen some projects that we've installed. We've seen the success of it. I think a lot of the times we do have to sort of temper our expectations because we get so much rainfall and we often get it in really short windows of time. So tempering the expectations of what we are trying to accomplish. But internally, us as a city government, we are on board. We talk about our next step and, the things that we've done that have worked, what hasn't worked, and how do we sort of combine that with other departments or other strategic plans. And in just about every strategic plan, you'll hear someone say, well, stormwater needs to be included. The parks master plan, a lot of the mobility plans, we try to kind of double up on a lot of the strategic plans and make sure that they overlap. So we're meeting a couple of different needs at one time.
Could you talk a little bit more about what these projects might look like? You mentioned a couple of the features, but what does this look like for people that haven't seen a project like this or some features?
Something that's really unique about New Orleans is almost every neighborhood looks different. Some neighborhoods have a ton of green space. Some of them are highly urbanized and have been overdeveloped, and it's almost like a concrete jungle, kind of like they say New York is. Our downtown area has very little trees, very little green space. So we have to kind of tailor it to the neighborhood that we're in. So in neighborhoods where we do have a lot of green space, say we have a lot of vacant lots, we can often partner with some of our other city agencies to transform those lots into detention ponds. So it'll look like a bowl, essentially. We'll go in and we'll put, whether it's trees or just some turf grass or whatever, something that allows us to kind of gives us a little bit extra space to hold that water. And that'll go back into the system. It'll discharge through the system in a couple of different ways. We have bioswales. So sometimes in the strip between the sidewalk and the roadway, there's a little strip of grass. We'll be able to plant native plantings. We basically create a little bit of a ditch almost in its most simplistic terms. We'll have rain gardens. Rain gardens can include a lot of those native plants also. A lot of times we'll include curb cuts where we'll cut a little slit in the curb and allow water to run off of the street into these rain gardens. Those can also serve as traffic calming devices. So it forces cars to slow down as they're going around a turn because they have to make a little bit of wider turn than they're used to. So you have that idea. Something we are also trying to do, and we try to incorporate this as much as possible, is to make sort of a multi-use space. So a lot of our parks and when we partner with our recreation department, we can put tanks underneath the park that allow water to come in from the drain lines off the street, fill up the tanks, and then go back into a drain line on the opposite side. That way, on a dry day, kids can still go play baseball, football, whatever they want to do. On a rainy day, the surface of it still looks normal, so it's still a grass or a field or whatever it needs to look like. But underneath, there's 400, 500, 600 gallons of water, 600,000 gallons of water that are underneath that are not in our roadways. Permeable pavement, so I like to call it the sort of Rice Krispie treat.
That's what it looks like, right? It's got that texture to it.
Yeah,
totally. I haven't heard that. That's a good
It's a porous pavement, so it's got all these void spaces that allow water. It's not much of a storage idea, but it's more of a conveyance thing, so it gets it off of the roadway, gives it a place to go. And again, there's a perforated pipe that's underneath, so it's got little holes on the top of it that allows it to get back into the drainage system. So we try to have these sort of multi-lines of defense system where we can do 4 or 5 things instead of just one really big thing, So it helps the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Of course, with the flooding, being able to get people to and from their homes, making sure that emergency vehicles can pass through, making sure that people can get in and out of their homes. So we're trying to meet as many needs as we can with one sort of large scale project.
Wanted to also just ask about the role of, I guess, private property. You're here managing, the city's taking on all the public spaces, right? Looking for places to do these things, but there's so much private property. So, what's happening? What do you see happening there, or why is that important to be part of this transformation in New Orleans?
We kind of look at sort of this multiple scales, multiple lines of defense system. So you have this really large, the coastal piece, right? Our coastal areas are really our first line of defense, our levee systems. And then we have our pump stations. And then we have the stuff that we as a city of New Orleans are doing that's a little bit smaller scale, but still on a relatively large footprint. And then you have our community organizations and the individual homeowner who are doing things on their property. And these can maybe affect a street, 2 streets, 4 or 5 blocks, something like that. But that highly localized area that they're impacting, it takes several of those smaller scale ones to be effective, and we need that. We need all the lines of defense at this point. So working with community organizations or helping homeowners figure out what they can do on their own property, those are all things that we consider highly valuable.
So this park we're at, what is this? What's happened here? What have you done?
So kind of to the naked eye, it looks just like every other park you would see. Just grass space, there's some playground stuff, I think there's some baseball equipment over there. What you don't see is that there are these exceptionally large tanks, for lack of a better word, that are underneath. And what those tanks do is allows us to take water out of the drainage system, put it into these big tanks, and then really slowly reintroduce it back into the drainage system out to where it needs to discharge. So
It's collecting water from like the road, basically.
you can look at a couple different spots on the road, but there are catch basins all around kind of where we're at. Those catch basins, depending on where you are in relation to the park, will accept that water off the street, and then it has, there's a pipe that connects to the tanks. So it'll dump all that water into the tanks. The tanks will fill up to a certain elevation, and then it'll go back out at a different portion, and it'll go into a really large drainage pipe, and that pipe goes all the way down the street and connects into one of our really large outfall canals.
And what's the capacity of these tanks? It's like...
The project in total, I think we're like right under 2 million gallons of water, something like that, between 1.5 to 2 million. So those tanks are relatively large. Again, to the naked eye, it doesn't look like anything's happening, but that allows us to use this space, and we can still service the neighborhood. Kids still have places to go. You can program the park. So we're not completely turning it into a bowl of water. We can accomplish 2 things at one time.
And so these features here, like, could you explain what's going on? Like, again, doesn't look like tons, but...
So what you're seeing here is what we call a rain garden. There's a catch basin inside of it. There's a curb cut over there. What happens is water will come off of the street. It'll go into this curb cut, and it'll flow through this entire bed and then get into the catch basin, which connects back to the drainage system. So at this particular location, we have all four corners have rain gardens at them. And these are native plants. We try to make sure that we're staying with native species here. We don't want anything invasive. We don't want to choke out the native plants. So we want things that are we want plants that are gonna help with that absorption as well. So you can see over here, it's the same thing. We keep these curb cuts installed, and that allows us to pull a little bit of water off of the street as well.
And then under our feet right now, we've got you call it the Rice Krispie.
This is permeable pavement or porous pavement. So typically you would see some void spaces here. This is a little bit old, so we actually need to come and vacuum this, but we don't get a lot of natural infiltration. All of our organic soils are clay. It looks like a relatively small space, but going back to sort of that gray and green that we have to do, we upgraded the drainage within the street. So the drainage pipes are much larger than they were before. You can see the streets look practically brand new. So we have to do a combination of a couple of things. These were things that were in sort of dire need of care. So we had the ability to sort of combine two projects into one, do the gray infrastructure. You know, we were able to upgrade even some of the other utilities in the street, the water lines, possibly the sewer lines as well. So it probably took about 2.5 to 3 years to do all of the construction, including the tanks and the rain gardens and the permeable pavement.
This is an opportunity for the city because it's this is your property, right? This is like a public park. So you have that opportunity, and then do you look for areas where there's also some kind of flooding issue or drainage issue, so it's like the intersection of the two?
So while an area may not look like a natural parking area for us, if the neighbors are parking in that place, we have a lot of off-street parking. So to take that away a lot of the time and put a rain garden or a bioswale or something that makes it completely unusable is a detriment to the community. And that's why I try to continue to say it's important for us to sit at the table with the community through every phase of this, so that we can also kind of understand what is the landscape of this neighborhood. How are people using the space? How are people getting around their own neighborhood? And then making sure that what we put in still meets the needs of the flooding, but also meets the needs of the community that exists there as well.
Private property is really key to spreading the living with water approach across the city of New Orleans. I'm here in the 7th Ward, which is one of the lowest lying areas of the city. And Angela Chalk of Healthy Community Services is really leading an effort to go even property by property, house by house, block by block, to put in green infrastructure, these nature-based solutions to capture the water, let it soak in, and reduce the flooding in the streets. Could you talk about the 7th Ward and the topography here and why that is challenging when it comes to managing water?
Well, the 7th Ward has been identified as one of the lowest spots in the city of New Orleans. And so out of necessity, living in the community that I live and work in, I identify with the flooding that's just caused from urban flooding, not necessarily from hurricanes, but just heavy downpours. And we know that that's occurring because no matter where you're at on the spectrum of whether or not you believe climate change is real or not, we're certainly feeling the impacts of weather events, more intense, more frequent weather events. And so the actions of Healthy Community Services are community-led actions that residents say this is what we want to see in our neighborhoods. The projects or the green infrastructure projects are complementary to the pumps, pipes, and drainage systems because we need pumps, pipes, drains, and canals. But we've gone back to nature-based solutions. And so residents identify those areas through a series of community meetings and visioning workshops to identify those areas that need to be targeted. And so Healthy Community Services serves as the community-based organization that receives philanthropic funding. And now with the Justice 40 initiative through the Biden administration, we're receiving federal funding as well to address those issues.
Why are the pipes and pumps not enough? Why do you need to go further and pull in the nature-based solutions, house by house, street by street?
The pipes, pumps, and drains in the canal serve their purpose in that it helps tremendously to pump large volumes of water out at the same time. It's the great infrastructure, but it's also an aged infrastructure. And in having anything that's an aged infrastructure, we need to go back to nature-based solutions to help complement those aged infrastructures. And so we can manage water where it falls, which is what we do using nature-based solutions. That relieves the tension and the pressure on the drains, the pipes, the canals, and the pumping station. And so the more water that we manage where it falls, it enters back into our water table, which helps prevent subsidence that occurs because we have to pump. And over time, we've tried to pump our way out of flooding, and we find that it just doesn't work. It's a part of the urban water cycle. The more we can slow that, what's called that time of concentration by managing water where it falls, whether that be a rain garden, a bioswale, a rain barrel, or a planter box, it helps to aid the pumps in facilitating to better pump large volumes of water.
Here in the 7th Ward, and I know in other places in New Orleans too, there's a lot of the hard surfaces put in, right? Like a lot of concreting of sidewalk areas, driveways, property. And so that's really something that helped contribute to the problem too, right? Is not just being low, not just the heavy rains, but then you have a lot of hard surfaces.
We have a lot of hard surfaces. We have areas where there were once ditches that residents have filled in because of parking. And then we also have those bad actors who will not use best practices in communities of color when it comes to making sure that you're not putting concrete down the drains, or even just the everyday citizen who may blow their leaves into the drainage system. Those things clog up the pipes that get the water to the pumping stations. Another thing that we do is to try and help residents to understand the role that we play. So it's not entirely upon our public utilities. The residents have a role in that. We have to work collectively to understand our problem and to see the role that we play in making sure that we're all protected from the disasters of climate. With that being said, we know that, and statistics shows us that, demonstrates that all the time, that communities of color are the ones that are the first to be impacted and the last to recover. So it's called first and worst. First to be impacted, worst to be impacted the most, and last to recover. And so my role as a community leader is to engage with residents, not just check off a box, actually get boots on the ground, talking with residents, engaging them through meetings, meeting people where they are, and communicating in a language that folks understand. And we've been successful with that. Here in the 7th Ward alone, we're managing right at 50,000 gallons of storm water per rain event. That may not seem significant to people, but if it's on your block, and it means whether or not your car is going to be flooded or whether or not you can get home from work or school, that's a significant amount of water.
Yeah, I love talking about like the significance of, oh my gosh, we need a whole big, huge change. But you can just go in like property by property, right? House by house, you start to chip away. And that's part of your mindset here?
Interventions are designed such that whether you're a homeowner or a renter, you can participate in having an intervention. So it could be as simple as a rain barrel, It can be permeable pavers, it can be a bioswale, it can be a rain garden, but everyone sits in on the block with the resident and contribute to what they want to see. They're educated so they know what type of intervention they want to see on the block and what will work. And then we work with a landscape architect to design that. Okay. But most importantly is that we work with workforce development groups like Groundworks New Orleans to bring, again, community-led young folks, to give them an opportunity to work on real projects in communities of color that affords them the opportunity to have living wage opportunities and experience in installing green infrastructure interventions.
What's been the reaction of the community, and how are people feeling?
We have to have that level of trust in the community. Without that level of trust in relationship building, none of what we would do or could do would not happen. And so it first evolved out of curiosity when we put in the first project, and then it became competitive. If my neighbor has one, well, I want one too, not even realizing what it was or what the benefit was. Yeah. And then as we engaged with residents and through the Waterwise Gulf South Collective and those other 6 community organizations, we have a network of 175 neighborhood champions who then bring that information to their friends, neighbors, and relatives. And so
word of mouth is the best.
Yes. Word of mouth and leaving. I always say this is so important in whatever community you're working in is to leave tangible assets in those communities. We can talk about this all day long, but if we are not leaving tangible assets for residents to have long after I'm gone, long after the funding may be gone, residents are then able to maintain these projects and know the benefits that they're receiving from it. Bioswale is a linear channel that manages water where it falls, and this particular bioswale is 40 feet long. It was excavated out to 1.5 feet, so it measures 40 by 2 by 1.5. Excavated out and then backfilled with an 80-20 mix of bioretention soil and number 57 limestone. Okay. But what's most important is the use of the native plants. So this is a dwarf palmetto, and when they were first installed, they were about 4 feet high. So the roots are as deep as the plant is high. Yeah. And so the water is able to infiltrate into the water table, and we're capturing the runoff from the roof of this property as well as the runoff from the adjacent property.
Plus the plants look awesome.
Yeah, and the plants have
very
thrived.
Cool. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So that's 40 feet long, 1.5 feet deep, a couple feet wide. It's got that stone in there because that's permeable, right?
That's permeable.
So that'll let the water kind of soak in much better, yeah.
And within 72 hours, the water has infiltrated into the ground, totally. And so we don't have to worry about mosquitoes.
Yeah, awesome. Oh yeah, the mosquito piece, right? That's key, so you don't have standing water.
We don't have standing water.
Yeah.
And this intervention is 7 years old. We're also providing habitat for birds, and so the birds are able to come in and feed off of the berries.
I see those little berries in there, yeah.
The berries of the dwarf palmetto.
These things right here. Wow.
And so we're able to harvest these berries and reseed them to reuse and repurpose to plant and grow additional plants.
Wow, that's awesome.
The water is here, it can be repurposed and used again.
Yeah.
Let's go in the backyard and I can show you how we're making land to demonstrate what's in the wetlands. This is mimics what happens in the wetlands with the land. And so we create this to demonstrate how land is created.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And so you have a carpet there.
Yeah.
Of how land is created in the wetlands and in the marsh.
And you can show that to people as you're teaching them.
Yes.
And that just helps them learn about coastal issues and resilience. And So this is a whole station here, like a solar-powered eco bench, and it has solar panels on top. It also catches the water and collects that and drains it out. It has a weather station built into it also for the community, and even a place for people to use that solar power to charge their mobile phones and other devices. And I also understand that people use it for shelter if there's a big downpour. So very cool, just like little asset for the community that serves many purposes, and including education.
Well,
Yeah.
this is the service project
gosh.
that was put in. And so with the volunteers from the water environment, we were able to partner with St. Aug, Healthy Community Services, Waterwise Gulf South, and local architect Dana Brown and Associates and Dan the Green Man to install this project. And so what was occurring here was that when there was a rain event, this street would flood.
Okay. Yeah.
So now this project is managing 4,500 gallons of water.
I mean, and it goes the whole way down this
the width
building?
of this building.
That's incredible.
So the water that's coming off of this roof enters into the bioswale. And the remaining water, once it reaches capacity, that goes directly into the storm system. But the first 4,500 gallons is maintained.
Yeah, I bet that's a significant rain
Yes.
garden there. Or
Yes.
You call that a bioswale?
This is a
or
bioswale
okay,
because it's
bioswale.
linear. Rain gardens are more circular and depressed.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
And so the art students were able to do an art project there. And again, we're using native plants. But more importantly, what the students learned was that, again, to be good environmental stewards, because of all of the things that you can find upon excavation, such as these water jars. Now, these water jars weren't found at this site, but this is a demonstration of what can be found when you're doing these sorts of projects.
Wow.
And so just from October, this is how it's grown. And again, those plants are all native plants.
Yeah, native plants, the grasses, right?
Yeah.
A couple different kinds of grasses.
There's muley grass,
muley grass,
irises. So what you see here, because we're in phase 2, the water comes off of Claiborne.
Okay, yeah, off the roadway.
Yeah,
in this
off of Claiborne into here. So this is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing by collecting that trash so that it doesn't get into the bioswale.
Okay.
It's providing an easier transition for residents that are exiting or evacuating during a hurricane from both Plaquemines, St. Bernard, and Orleans. And businesses now have called me, folks along this are now willing to relocate along this corridor because of the potential for less flooding as a result of this project. Mr. Garcia was the first business to allow me to put this planter box here to manage water. We're collecting the water off of his roof into this downspout. And so this is maybe 5 years old.
Okay. That's all it takes to make a difference, right?
Yeah.
Just like this.
Yeah. And what we found when we first did this was that this side of the street didn't flood, but that side of the street did.
They got the water over there from...
No.
Oh.
The water stayed here.
Got
Again,
it.
managing water where it falls.
So this side doesn't flood.
But that side
does,
did.
yeah.
Now, let's take our last stop.
Okay.
I come out and I see this and I'm just so excited, but I wish residents could see that, their behavior. This is the
For
cost
sure.
of their behavior.
Yep, absolutely.
And we all have a role to play in this. And it's not just the utilities, because the folks who operate the pump systems, they live here as well. And I want to say the pump operators don't get enough respect. And in my opinion, they're right up there with police, fire, and EMS because they're protecting us 24/7.
It's kind of amazing to me the amount of trash that there is in our waterways. We're here at pumping station number 3 in New Orleans, and you can see in the water back here just all the trash that builds up at a location like this. We were just further down in the canal and saw how a community organization put a boom in the canal to capture the trash and then take it out so that it doesn't build up at the pumping stations and, you know, get in the way of them moving the water when it needs to get moved. So. For 300 years, New Orleans has had an intimate relationship with the Mississippi River and with water. They were known as an innovator for how they managed that water. New challenges call for new approaches, and now they are reclaiming that title of innovators through living with water. I think the projects and the experiences that they're having can provide valuable lessons for other communities to follow.
Waterloop.
Thank you for checking out this episode from the nonprofit media outlet Waterloop. To find all podcasts, sign up for email updates, and connect on social media, visit waterloop.org.
Waterloop, Waterloop, Waterloop.